Tonight we're pleased to welcome Frank Scheer with tonight's program titled "When the Mail Traveled First Class on the 20th Century Limited." Frank Scheer has been the curator of the Railway Mail Service Library since 1980. This archival library, based in Boyce, Virginia, focuses solely on railway and highway post office services that operated in many countries. Frank has a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Virginia and master's and doctoral degrees in transportation and logistics, what's now referred to as supply chain management. His career included station agency and tower operator positions on the RF&P and the Chesapeake and Ohio, assistant to train master on the Norfolk and Western, United States Railway Association's asset valuation case, railroad coal transportation contracting, and hopper car leasing for Virginia Electric and Power Company, as well as freight and traffic management and transportation services contracting for the U.S. Postal Service. So Frank, welcome to Mass Bay RRE.
Thank you very much, David. I'm certainly pleased to be with you all tonight. Just so that you know, that's the 1913 Boyce Railway Depot, built by the Norfolk and Western Railway, and it is the home of the Railway Mail Service Library at Boyce, Virginia. As a preface to all of this, there is a PDF file that is available that has notes pages as well as all the presentation slides, so that if I move too quickly or people want to refer to anything that I am saying later on, you'll be able to look at that PDF file, and there's just about as much content and photographs in the notes page view under the notes as there are in the presentation slides. I also do not just read the presentation slides, I'll talk to them and mainly focus on if there's an image or a graphic, explain that to the attendees. So I'm very pleased to be here tonight. And so what we're going to talk about tonight, basically four subtopics. Before there was the 20th Century Limited, there was the fast mail. And there were mail-only trains on the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad and the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern. Then the 20th Century Limited was established in 1902 and ran till operated till 1967. It did not necessarily have a railway post office car in the first 2 or 3 years, and I've been trying to do additional research to find out exactly when it did start. But for the purpose of this discussion, it seems like the 20th Century Limited had a railway post office associated with it after about 1905. Then we're going to talk about covers. Covers is a code word among philatelists and stamp collectors or postal historians for envelopes. These are envelopes that were postmarked on the 20th Century Limited. Many people are not aware that of all the railroadiana that people can collect, you can actually get for fairly reasonable prices examples of covers that were handled on the 20th Century Limited for various years. And so we're going to illustrate some and explain those, and then a quick summary, and then we'll just see how we proceed after that. The advertisement is back in 1902 when the New York Central System celebrated its 10th anniversary for the 20th Century Limited. It was talking about, the advantages of that particular train. It also, in the advertising, I think most people have heard the water level route. You can sleep. The mail wasn't sleeping; it was being sorted. Now, this before there was a 20th Century Limited, about 25 years earlier, there was the fast mail, and this is out of Harper's Magazine. The theme of this particular advertisement, it's showing the interior of a railway post office car, reasonably accurate as artwork goes. And it's explaining that if the federal government trusts the mail to the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern for reliability and on-time performance and safety and security, that the passenger travelers ought to consider riding on the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern as well. So anyway, that ad is one of the things that's in that PDF file. You can take a look at it later on. That's another type of ephemera that people who collect railroad artifacts, you can look for that in Harper's Magazine and other publications, some of the early Lakeshore and Michigan Southern ads. Their logo was the mail pouch shown at the lower left corner. Lakeshore and Michigan Southern, the fast mail line. So the fast mail operated over those two railroads, Lake New York Central and Hudson River, and the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern, started in 1875, and it was the first expedited mail transportation in the United States. And until we started airmail transportation in 1918, it was the fastest thing going. So it was not unusual to have first-class mail handled overnight between New York, Chicago, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and St. Louis. So the intermediate cities that basically comprise the major termini of the New York Central system. I could probably include Boston in there as well, since we're talking about the Mass Bay. There was a direct connection for, as many of the RRE members probably know, direct connection for the 20th Century Limited from Boston over the Boston and Albany. The fast mail had its own postmark. States that this one was on Train 8, a New York and Chicago Railway Post Office. And this operated, if that's Train 8, it operated out of New York City. The PDF file shows a schedule for that particular train. It's not visible in the notes pages, but it's not visible here, but it's in the note pages. And then this is what one of the cars, there were about 4 cars in the fast mail. They basically look like this. One was a paper car, one was a letters, 2 were letters cars, and one handled other mail, local mail. And they were named for the governors of New York State. This was Governor McKinley and its crew. The number of clerks that you see are the number of clerks that usually worked in these cars. So you had basically a car that was full of mail, full of people, sorting mail en route. And they basically worked the entire distance, not for New York to Chicago, but it was divided into 3 divisions between New York and Syracuse, Syracuse and Cleveland, and then Cleveland to Chicago. And the New York Lakeshore, Michigan Southern portion was the portion operating from Cleveland the rest of the way into Chicago. I'll also point out that to the 2 clerks that are standing over the left, one with a cap and one that doesn't have a cap, you see a little rectangular item on the side of the car. That's a letter slot. And so passengers standing on the platform of a train could insert their letter on the platform if they were waiting for the train and the train was stopped. There were not very many stops for the fast mail, but wherever it did stop, many people might give their mail to the station agent if they knew it was going to stop there, or they could wait for the train themselves, post the letter. Any mail that went through that slot received the postmark. The vast majority, I'd say 99% of the mail that was sorted in the fast mail and in the 20th Century Limited did not receive a postmark. It was just distributed. And I'll get into the situations at the end when I'm talking about covers about when mail was postmarked on the train. But for the most part, there was a vast amount of mail that was being processed. Very small quantities of it actually received the fast mail or the 20th Century Limited postmark. This is the advertisement that appeared in the meeting announcement. It's a 1944 ad lifted from the Saturday Evening Post. This is also frequently available on eBay. You can find where somebody has this advertisement. They've cut it out of the magazine and they're selling it separately. The reason why I like it is because it's a nice cutaway view that shows all the functions that were going on within a railway post office car. For those that are interested in the entire 20th Century Limited, including the observation car, the dining car, the sleeping cars, and so on, there were similar ads for each of those other cars featuring them. The main thrust of this particular advertisement was that no matter how influential you were riding this train, how much money you paid, or how much what your status was, you could not step foot into this car unless you were a postal clerk. The Railway Mail Service had its own personnel. They were post office department employees. They were not associated. Some people think they're associated with the Railway Express. They were not associated with Railway Express. They were post office department employees, and they sorted the mail. In the upper right-hand corner and the very lower left, there are pouches and sacks that are waiting to be sorted, or they've already been sorted and they're awaiting dispatch at an intermediate or the end terminal. And then in the upper right-hand corner, just below that area where it looks like there's a door opening coming into the car, you see the letter cases. There's about 1,044 separations there, with usually about 5 to 6 clerks sorting mail individually into the letter slots. In a little bit lower down, there's a couple guys that look like they're sitting down. They're working the registered mail. Usually it was just one clerk sorting registered mail, but they might have somebody else witnessing the opening and accounting for registered mail. Registered mail was very important because it was hand-to-hand transfers, very secure, and from the entire time that it was mailed to the time it was delivered, there was accountability for a particular letter piece. For this reason, all the federal currency from the Federal Reserve Bank, all the gold that went to Fort Knox, and all the coin and currents, the coin that was produced at U.S. Mint, transported as registered mail. Sometimes it was in a railway post office car. In other cases, it was in a storage mail car that people frequently call a baggage car. There was usually security, and especially for the gold shipments, those were even special trains when they were doing a transfer from New York or from other locations. In 1934, they moved all the gold that is now in Fort Knox by the Railway Mail Service. Then you get to where it says overhead paper boxes. Those clerks are sorting. One clerk is sorting the letter, they call it letter packages, when you get a group of letters that have been tied out in the distribution case. And that goes into pouches that are being dispatched. The rest of it is they're throwing newspapers or small parcels into the overhead boxes, magazines, and so on, including the Saturday Evening Post that was sent rolled up and being dispatched into sacks. And so that's what was going on inside of a railway post office car. There is a video that David can describe to you that's a recording. It's a 1956 film that's 28 minutes long, which shows how all this worked. It was developed as a training program, and it's called Men in Mail in Transit. If it doesn't turn out that it's visible tonight, then you can always go to YouTube and do a search for Men in Mail in Transit. One other thing about this, in the lower right-hand corner, above New York Central, you see the picker-upper. Well, that's the mail crane and the catcher arm. And so at particular locations, there might be a trackside pouch, and the train would be catching a pouch and then also dispatching it while the train was moving. By 1938, the 20th Century Limited was revamped. Many people have seen this picture. Most people are focusing on that nice, pretty Hudson with the Dreyfus styling. I always look at the car behind the tender, and that's the Railway Post Office car, a 60-foot car that is the example that was shown in the previous ad. And then you have the sleeping cars, dining car, and the rest of the train. Back in 1938, this appears to have been running the full 20-car limit for a passenger train, and it's departing Chicago on the eastbound trip to New York City. And then in 1948 or 47, the 20th Century Limited got another remake, more modern equipment, trying to revive the passenger service after the World War II years, when the equipment was heavily used and was very worn out. And it maintained the luxury status that it had. And again, behind the three locomotives with the lightning stripes, the Railway Post Office car appears there. Now, the difference between the preceding photograph and this one is it's obvious that the company photographer asked for the train to stop briefly at Cold Spring. Otherwise, you wouldn't have that steam streaming up from the side of the car from the steam line connection. Still a good long train. I'm not sure it's all 20 cars, but it's a respectable train even in 1947. So the first trip of the 20th century was on June 17th, 1902, and there was a post office car for sure on the train by 1908. And then in 1912, both trains, 25 and 26, had a Railway Post Office car assigned to the train. There was also in the Boston and Albany a train 25 and 26 that made these connections. That also had a 60-foot car, but those RPO cars only operated between Boston and Albany and made the connection for mail for intermediate locations, as well as to the 20th Century Limited for anything going further west, or if it's train 26, anything coming east from Boston, east to Boston. The average trip length for a 60-foot RPO crew was 300 miles. That's why they divided the New York Central system into the divisions that I mentioned earlier, between New York and Syracuse, Syracuse and Cleveland, Cleveland and Chicago. In later years, they actually changed that. The middle part between Syracuse and Cleveland was called the Middle Division, and they lengthened the route so that it was basically going to New York to Buffalo instead of Syracuse, and then Buffalo to Chicago. So, but the same car ran through. They just switched crews. As the train would pull in, the crew for the East Division, Middle Division, West Division would have set up the car for the West, for the crew that's going to continue. And they'd hop out at that point very quickly, because I think there was only about a 10-minute dwell time at those locations where it continued. Cleveland was also a very interesting situation, because to make the connection for mail, it did not pull into the Cincinnati, the Cleveland Union Terminal. It was out in the yard, and they would run a shuttle train out to it that had gangplanks down and pull up next to it and drop the gangplanks down and transfer mail between the one car to the train. This is what a 20th Century Limited postmark looks like. The hand stamp, the device that made these imprints. These were produced back prior to 1931. Most of them are around 1920s. They were made by a company that was down in Lodge, Virginia, that I've written an article about. There's a lot more information about that for anybody that's interested. The New York and Chicago RPO 20th Century Limited had the distinction that this was the only train in the country that had the name of the train on the postmarker. For some celebratory occasions, the Broadway Limited had a special rubber postmark that said Broadway Limited, but regular postmarks used on the New York and Pittsburgh and Chicago for trains 29 and 28. They just said New York and Pittsburgh and Chicago. They did not have Broadway Limited in there. So the 20th Century Limited had that cachet of a very special train with a very special railway post office. It is said that they had actually couriers in Chicago or in New York City that would actually take mail down to the train and put it on the train, knowing that they would get preferential delivery the following day in the other city, because as the train was going west, it was sorting Chicago mail out of New York City, and coming east out of Chicago, it was sorting mail for New York City down to the stations and branches. So there are three types of markings applied in RPOs. They are the ones that were applied to cancel a first class letter. And that's if you put the letter into the slot on the car or handed it to a clerk on the train, it received the postmark that I'll be showing in just a minute. If you also sent a letter by special delivery, or if a letter was missent, the crew would postmark it. And for the missent mail, the idea was for missent letters, it was to indicate that it was wrongly dispatched to a particular train, and the clerk would postmark it and then put missent on it. And that way, the post office department, if there was an inquiry by somebody, would have a better understanding about why the letter took more than a day or 2 days to get from origin to destination. Keep in mind that in this era, there was a lot of times where mail was actually moving between origin and destination within the same day. I've done some other research and presentations that show, for example, from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, going down to Lynchburg, Virginia, that a letter mailed at sunrise was being delivered in Lynchburg, Virginia at sunset, 12 hours from one place to the other by 3 different railway post offices with less than an hour connection between the routes. But in any event, the special delivery covers are very interesting to me. You'll see some examples in just a moment, because you can reconstruct the movement of a letter from origin to destination, including any railway post offices or links that were not applying a postmark. You can figure out exactly how a letter moved all the way from origin to destination. That's significant because first class mail and special delivery mail was handled the same way from the standpoint of sortation and dispatch. The only thing that special delivery really allowed was, as soon as the letter got to the destination, then it had immediate delivery. And that was important if you were mailing a letter and it was going to arrive after, let's say, 5 p.m. after the last regular mail delivery of the day, or if it arrived on a Sunday or a legal holiday, the special delivery messenger would go on out and deliver it, just like they do with express mail now, except for a lot more money than the special delivery stamp was. And then not seen by most people, but certainly of interest, there are postal forms such as the trip report and the space report that the clerk in charge prepared, that they would apply the postmarks to those. Now, there are 3 different kinds of postmarking devices that were used. The road stamp what I'm calling the road stamp is that steel postmarker like you saw in the previous illustration. And then the auxiliary markings that might say missent or damaged in the mail or some other explanation that doesn't include a city, state, and date. Also, too, the clerks all had a rubber stamp that they would apply to facing slips and labels that went onto the pouches that indicated what clerk prepared that letter package or a pouch or a sack. And that was important. If, again, there was errors in that, then it was reported to the district office, and that clerk was charged demerits. They were expected to be able to sort mail with 90%, 97% accuracy. Many did more than that, but it was a very impressive level of performance. All clerks have that. On occasion, you'll see those on covers, and you'll see an example of that as well. So this is a sample special delivery cover. This is what I mentioned, why I like it so much, because this letter, without looking at the front appears in the notes pages, but without, it was mailed in East Braintree, Massachusetts. So on the front, it has a postmark for East Braintree that shows when the letter started. Went by way of the Boston and Plymouth RPO, then to the Boston, Springfield, New York, and then by way of the New York and Chicago 20th Century Limited to, and that the 20th Century Limited made a dispatch to Fostoria, Ohio. So special delivery covers are of special interest, at least to me, and I think to many other collectors, but the benefit is that this letter did not need to be mailed on the train, but it received that 20th Century Limited postmark. And it's a good way to find these for a collection if you want to collect specifically 20th Century Limited material. And this cover dates to 1934. This is another example of a special delivery letter. This one's commercial. Both of these were commercial covers. They were not philatelic as far as I can tell, where a collector was purposely sending it special delivery just to get the postmarks. So it went from Willsboro, New York. That post office dispatched it to the Rouse's Point in Albany RPO. And then the New York and Chicago RPO received it from the Rouse's Point in Albany, at Albany, most likely, and then made the dispatch directly to Dayton, Ohio. Lots of smearing here, but it's legible enough for if anybody gets a cover like this, the Railway Mail Service Library can probably go ahead and decipher partial postmarks or other attributes about the cover that might not be immediately available. So this one, not sure exactly where it started its journey. Again, the front of the cover's in the notes pages, but it went through the New York and Chicago Middle Division, 20th Century Limited RPO, and then let's see, that may actually be a Boston and New York, Boston Springfield, New York postmark in the upper right-hand corner where you don't see the Springfield. Then it went to the New York and Chicago Middle Division, and then they could have had a pouch coming off the Boston Springfield in New York that was not open until it got past Albany or past Syracuse. And then that train dispatched it to the Cleveland and St. Louis RPO, which then maybe the cover is going the other way because the endpoint is Tuscana, New York. I guess it's coming from somewhere else, and then it went back the other way. That's the difficulty for doing this presentation is I'm not looking at the notes pages, so I'm just sort of doing what I can remember. But anyway, a good example again, how a multiple railway post offices. The thing to remember about railway post offices is that it wasn't just serving the post offices located along a route. It was serving post offices that were not along the route. The New York City mail was being sorted by railway post offices coming out of San Francisco. New York and Chicago was making up mail for California. And it all relied upon an integrated network of connecting routes, usually with very close connections, that really made the system very efficient up until about the 1950s, until passenger trains really started being discontinued. This is an example in the upper right-hand corner, New York and Chicago. This is the rubber postmarker that belonged to L.C. Martin. Doesn't say 20th Century Limited, but you know that this is a 20th Century Limited postmark because it's train 26 in 1936. That's New York and Chicago Middle Division. That rubber postmark, it was also back-stamped on the West Division of the New York and Chicago, but that's train 35. So it could have been mailed going westbound, and then they turned it around and it's started heading back eastbound on train 26 to whatever the destination was of the letter. Then you have special event covers. And this is an example, that first photograph that I showed of the new 20th Century Limited from 1938. They had a cachet for it. Any kind of a little rubber stamp that you see on the left side of the envelope like that explains what it is, that enhances the cover. That is a cachet. And it's a good example of a New York and Chicago East Division 20th Century Limited being mailed to a recipient in Red Wing, Minnesota. Then in 1947, 1948, they had the new 20th Century Limited with the diesels and streamlined passenger equipment. And this one was also mailed out of New York City, probably on the East Division of the New York and Chicago RPO on the 20th Century Limited. Keep in mind that postmark that you see there was made sometime prior to 1931, and but it was still being used in 1940s, and many of them continued to be used until the 20th Century Limited was discontinued in 1967. This one has a rubber postmarker. Whether it actually got onto the train or not, it's not clear to me whether or not they took all these and actually postmarked them in a place. You don't usually get a nice level postmark like that with clear imprint, and particularly being a rubber stamp. But it's the when the 20th Century Limited reached its golden anniversary, they had this cover here with a printed cachet. And this one of particular interest to me is that it went to the General Superintendent. The Railway Mail Service was renamed the Postal Transportation Service in 1948. And so this is going to the General Superintendent for the 9th Division in Cleveland, Ohio. 9th Division of the Railway Mail Service. So in summary, we've covered a fair amount of ground in a short period of time. The 20th Century Limited, all-Pullman train, first-class passengers, had a railway post office. And of course, none of those passengers, no matter how affluent they were, could step into the railway post office car. That was exclusively for mail, and mail truly traveled first class on the 20th Century Limited. There are lots of these covers around. Certainly enough that if you want to try to collect them, you can find them. Many of them have 20th Century Limited. In other cases, it might only have train 25 or train 26. But if it said New York and Chicago, East Division, Middle Division, West Division, and had TR 25 or TR 26, you know that it was on the 20th Century Limited. And then there's other ephemera such as advertising that you might see for the 20th Century Limited. Since it was such a famous train, there's lots of photographs, souvenirs, and other items that could be collected for that train. And just to let you know, the information resources for interpreting these RPO markings, route schedules, they're available from the Railway Mail Service Library. And that in a later slide, when we get to questions or after questions, this is the address for the Railway Mail Service Library. I'll let this stay up. If you want to write down that email address or the mailing address, I'd like to hear from you. And of course, this is in the PDF file too for later reference.
So I'm not seeing any questions. So if you got a question, please, I've got one. In the diagram when you were describing the RPO car on the 20th century, you mentioned that there were 1,000 small cubbies there that the clerks were sorting mail into, the smaller ones. What level of sortation did they do aboard the car? Was it just to a particular local post office for each cubby, or what level of sortation took place en route?
Okay, there were 3 levels. One was just sorting to a state. So if you were leaving New York City, they might have a letter case where they were just getting raw mail from any connections and making up anything that was going to Nevada, anything that was going to Oregon, anything that was going to Washington State, for example. So you had separations for states. And then a second level of distribution was picking out the major cities. If usually coming out of a place like New York City or the East Coast with the connections, you had a fair amount of mail that was going specifically to San Francisco or to Seattle, Washington, or other major cities. Los Angeles. A lot of people were writing fan mail to the Hollywood stars. So you actually had a lot of mail going to Los Angeles. And so they would also be making up direct letter packages of mail going to a major city. And then the third was that they would do city distribution. Well, actually, I guess there are 4. I'll get back to the fourth one in a second. But the third one was they would do city distribution for, let's say, Chicago going westbound or New York City going eastbound. They also did direct distribution for Boston, did direct distribution for Syracuse. So each of those clerks had an assignment. Let me add one more. Yes, and so you had the towns along the way, the post offices for towns that were directly on the route or were supplied by the route. It may not, the post office may not have actually been right on the main line of the New York Central System or the Boston and Albany, but it was close enough that there was a connection by mail messenger from a station to get the mail over to that location, to that post office. So they were making up direct pouches for those. So 4 different kinds. Each clerk had its own assignment, and the assignments varied by train and by direction. So westbound, a clerk might be sorting Chicago mail. Eastbound might be sorting Boston mail, and so on like that. And then, of course, there were many other railway post offices on the Boston and Albany and on the New York and Chicago. Those other trains, because of the time of day and the connections that they made, those clerks may well have had other kinds of assignments. For example, coming out of Cleveland on the Big 4 going down to St. Louis, you might have a fair amount of St. Louis mail, city mail being worked on some trains, but not others. So that's the short answer for that. but that's the kind of thing that I can provide more information about if somebody's got a specific cover and they want more information about the priority of a particular mail being handled. And I think there are some questions now.
Yeah, there are. So I'll just read them here. Did the Pennsylvania Railroad have a competing or maybe not competing, but a RPO service between New York and Chicago?
Yes, it did. It was the New York and Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh and Chicago, not just limited to the Broadway Limited. The Pennsy and the New York Central were strong competitors in that New York to Chicago market. One thing I should mention is that the two largest mail hauling carriers in the country were the Pennsylvania and the New York Central. They flip-flopped a little bit from time to time, but a tremendous amount of mail was handled by the Pennsylvania Railroad, and Pennsylvania Railroad also had the advantage that it had a lot of mail going New York down to Washington, D.C. So, some of it, but yes, there was a 60-foot railway post office car on the Broadway Limited, and then there were other lines that had 2 or even 3 60-foot cars. On the New York Central system, there were some trains that had as many as 3 railway post office cars, just like the New Haven Railroad coming out of Boston going down to New York, train 179, that had 3 railway post offices. So, with a general foreman in charge of the other 2 clerks in charge. So.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple other questions here. Jeff Gabriel asks, how did they check the 97% or better accuracy of the clerks?
Okay, there were periodic examinations. A clerk on their assignment, if they were required to learn the distribution for a particular state. Generally, most of these clerks knew the distribution for 10,000 post offices, it's been said. And that's probably about pretty accurate. It wasn't quite just so simple knowing what the distribution was for 10,000 post offices, because you had weather delays. If train schedules changed, you had to know what Plan B and Plan C was for connecting mail by the quickest possible means from origin to destination, from your standpoint. So it was a very complex type of study that had to be done. I would be a lousy railway postal clerk. I can use the information they had that they had to study and can interpret it and provide information about how something moved, but to have retained all that in memory. And I've gone to reunions, and 20 or 30 years after the reunions, a lot of these clerks, you could tell them the name of a town and they could click off what the dispatch was for it. It was so ingrained in their minds. So they had periodic examinations. They had to go into an office where they had to present their equipment. That's one of the things, if you watch this video, I think they show that briefly in there. If not, it's in another video called Mail in Motion that I think is also on YouTube. But anyway, they had to go in for examinations. And in the course of doing that examination, they had to be 97% correct. Some of them did even better than that. Now, the other way that they confirm that they were being accurate is if a clerk received a letter in a dispatch that they did not expect to receive, that it was wrongly sent, they would take that facing slip, write up what the error is, and send it into the district office. So that was the other way in which a clerk, and they were assigned demerits for that. So there was that sort of that feedback loop there, not only from examinations, but also from the day-to-day working of mail and recording any errors and reporting those to the district office of how a particular clerk was performing.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Where did the RPO clerks employees stay at each end of their division?
Okay, there were a couple different choices. First, they could make their own arrangements any place they could find a place. Some of them got boarding houses. Some of them actually got together and established what was called a railway mail club. And they would rent a floor. For example, in New York City, I can't remember the name of the hotel right offhand, but it was not very far from Grand Central Terminal. I think the Pensy guys did something similar closer to Penn Station, but they rented a whole floor and paid basically one rate for all the hotel rooms on that floor, and they managed the clerks going in and out. And there was also in Boston, Massachusetts, there was a railway mail club on Bullfinch Street. Not there anymore, but basically they had a building that probably had, they had converted so that it had about 10 or 12 bedrooms, usually with 2 or 3 bunks in each room. And somebody who was either a former railway mail clerk or somebody who was just doing it on layoff, was sort of like the hotel manager, if you will, for checking people in and out and making sure that they paid their monthly dues. They could stay there. And I've seen only a picture of the front door of the Bullfinch Street building. I'd certainly like to see the whole building, but since it doesn't exist anymore, you can't go to Google Maps and see that. Anyway, the other choice was railroad YMCAs. In many cities, such as Washington, D.C., New York, at the railroad terminal, the railroad YMCA had dormitories, basically a large room with lots of bunks. And they'd have a little area, maybe a snack bar in addition, and a little social lounge where you could sit there and read newspapers or whatever. But most of those guys wanted to just sleep when they were away from home. And so that served the purpose. There was a place to rest. So that's where they were.
That's a shades of the sort of illegal apartments that was discovered in like East Boston for flight attendants who the airlines were too cheap to put up in hotel rooms on their layover. Next question from Reg Mitchell. I'm not even sure you mentioned pistols, but anyway, he asks, were the pistols carried by the clerk government issue or personally owned firearms? If they were standardized, what are the details, type, caliber, etc.?
I can fill you in on that. And
great.
also too, on the email address, if you want more information, you want pictures, I can fill your inbox with that. First of all, railway postal clerks did not carry pistols until about 1923, when there was a spat of several major mail train robberies. And some of those were pretty lethal. One clerk up in near the border of Oregon and Washington, Tunnel 13 in the Siskiyou Mountains, they used too much dynamite and they incinerated the car, never got any gold. They thought there was gold in the train. And unfortunately, the clerk was cooked. So a very unhappy ending. But after all of that, they actually got, first off, they got Colt News Service revolvers that were excess from World War I. and assign those to the railway mail clerks. And those are very heavy. They had a 4 or 5 inch barrel, I forget which. They were 45 caliber, very heavy, very big pistol. And when you're standing up and sorting mail for 10 or 12 hours, that weight on your hip really weighs you down. So by about 1923, 24, the post office department procured, first of all, Colt police positives that were a 2-inch barrel, 38 caliber Smith & Wesson bullet, and assigned those to clerks. And then Colt came out with what they called the banker special. There's a subtle difference between the police positive with a short barrel and the banker special. And there's books about Colt. You can read about what it's like, about 1/8 of an inch difference in the cylinder and so on like that. But every clerk was assigned a firearm. They had to do firearms training. And the video, that if David is successful in showing it, will show them pulling it out of their road grip and getting ready and putting it on their hip for the trip. So every clerk, until about 1964, all clerks carried a firearm. Then they cut it back to only the clerks that were in the doorway, the registered mail clerk, and the clerk in charge had to carry a firearm. So the other clerks that were working on the inside of the car were not required to then have firearms training, a firearms permit, and carry a gun. There were some Smith & Wesson revolvers that were issued. I'm not sure I've seen any. Well, I think I do have one. And I think there was also a Defender Special that Colt produced that also had some postal markings on it. And then also Harrington and Richardson produced some 38 caliber Smith & Wesson bullet. They took Smith & Wesson bullets that they issued, but those were relatively uncommon. That was getting towards the end of the period. I'll also mention that for about a year or two, U.S. Marines were stationed on railway post offices. And they had strict orders that were very simple. If you shoot to kill. If the person doesn't halt, you go ahead and kill them. That also was a deterrent from the robberies of registered mail, primarily. Again, these were gold shipments. In some cases, there were also currency and coin being sent to Federal Reserve banks. So there's a lot of information about firearms. Just shoot me an email. I can send you pictures, and they can be found on Gunbroker. They average about $2,000 each for the ones that survive. Some are a little bit less, but they're a little bit more wear, and some people have ideas that these things are worth $4,000, but somewhere around $2,000 is what you can expect to pay for an original Colt Banker Special marked RMS PO department. And then it has a number on the butt that was the Railway Mail Service number, in addition to the serial number that was on the frame.
Okay, and Doug Scott has asked if you can talk briefly about the museum and the library.
Well, and if that's Doug Scott that I know, hello, Doug.
It probably isn't Doug Scott. He started off by saying, hi, Frank. So
hi, Frank. Okay. Well, Doug, nice to have you participating. So the Railway Mail Service Library, there was a fellow named Brian Alden Long who wrote a book in 1952 called Mail by Rail. And he established a library called the Amarpo Library, which was American RPO. And it was a branch of a British Traveling Post Office Society. Well, I don't know who that person, handsome person is, but hello to you too. So anyway, then in about 1950s, that railway mail, that Amapo library was transferred to a fellow named Herschel Rankin, and then Herschel Rankin, around 1980, he was 80 years old. I checked with him to ask a question, and he said, by the way, if you want to buy the RMS library, let's talk. And so that's the point where I measure my beginning as curator of the Railway Mail Service Library, and then added quite a few other collections to it. In 20 years ago, this October, in about 2 weeks, I purchased the Boyce Railway Depot, which appears behind me in the view that you see, and moved the library into there. The building's 26 feet wide and 141 feet long. And it's 2/3 of it is the library, and then the rest of it has various other artifacts that are railroad artifacts and some other items. So the vision is to build a new archival facility on a lot that's owned by the Railway Mail Service Library that's behind the station. The problem, as with any railroad building that's sitting on railroad land, is the land's leased by the railroad. It's not owned by the library, and it can be canceled on 30 days notice. But I checked with other people, and having worked for railroads, I sort of have a familiarity with railroads, that it's been on a 30-day cancellation clause since 1955. It's unlikely the Norfolk and Western, and now Norfolk Southern, is going to do anything about, other than just increasing the rent, is going to do anything about demolishing the station. So, and they'd have to give me at least 30 days notice to move it if they did. So that's the Railway Mail Service Library. More information about that is also available. And if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about tonight, or if you have some postmarked covers that were on railway post offices, or if you're interested in the schedules of mail trains that operated, for example, over the Boston and Albany, I can fix you up. That's exactly what the Railway Mail Service Library does. Thank you, Doug.
I think you said you purchased the library purchased the depot building.
Yes.
So you own the building. There's a question there about have you looked into buying a depot? Well, you already owned it. Looked into moving it off the railroad property?
Well, it's a masonry building, and your issue is moving a masonry building is expensive. And plus that, having worked as a station agent operator, I have a preference for a station that's sitting right next to the track, 25 feet from the center line of the track, with trains going by. That's much more satisfying to me than to have something just sitting on a piece of land someplace remote from the railroad. It would have to be a situation where the railroad came up with some rationale that they needed the land for some other purpose, that it'd have to get moved off. And there is a backup plan that there's room enough on that lot where this new archival building is going to be built that you could move the station there, and it doesn't have to cross any major roads. It's a piece of property that's adjacent to the rear of the building. I'm hoping it never comes to that. That may be an issue beyond my lifetime for whoever is involved with the Boyce Railway Depot Foundation to figure out what they're going to do.
So does is there any historic protected status applied to the depot building?
It's a part of they established a Boyce Historic District, and that is this was a contributing structure to that. It's a little different than being on the National Register of Historic Landmarks. I can tell you railroads typically do not want to have a building that's on their property that's a National Historic Landmark, because then that limits their ability to do whatever they think they can do. And, we all seen how Norfolk Southern in particular has gone through a revolving door of executives, some who really like rail fans and some who are lawyers who could care less about rail fans. So, it's sort of which way the wind is blowing. The general view I have, having worked for a railroad and having 20 years experience of dealing with Norfolk Southern, is that you don't rock the boat. Just leave it as it is. It's historic enough. You don't need a plaque on the wall to give it any special status.
Great. Okay, well, at this point, there's no outstanding questions. So before we go any further, Frank, I just want to thank you for a very interesting and informative presentation, and for all the additional detail that you provided in the Q&A. It's really something we don't get exposed to very often, and I'm sure there's much more information than what you shared with us tonight. I also want to thank Alan McMillan, who made the contact with Frank and really initiated getting this program for us tonight. At this point, I want to move on and try to show this video.